Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 241 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about company values and why no one in your company really cares about them, which I find a common thing in many organizations these days. So let's get into this topic and start to use our values more effectively. Company values have been used within organizations for a long time, and these days I find it rare to come across a company that doesn't refer to a set of values as part of its ideal culture and strategy. Unfortunately, just having a set of company values doesn't really help by itself. For them to take hold and make an impact, they need to actually be useful. So in this episode, I'm going to take a bit of a look at what company values are, why they can be useful, and of course, some ways that you might make them have a greater impact for your team and your organization. So let's start at the beginning. What are these things we call company values? Well, in a literal sense, they are just words. You would have heard words like honesty, integrity, compassion, innovation, for example. Now, I'm a big fan of identifying and making sense of our own personal values, not just for leadership, but for anyone in general, no matter what they do. Company values use the same types of words as personal values, except applied to an organization rather than a person. So there's a few examples I'll put in the show notes page of values lists you can look at from Brené Brown and James Clear. The show notes page for this episode is thoughtfulleader.com/241. So you can download the PDFs there for free of those values lists, and you can see what sort of words I'm talking about. Now, company values are a set of words that aim to embody the culture and way of operating within an organization. Leaders choose company values to try to set the tone for how people and the business will operate, or at least how they want the business to operate. Now, they were formally introduced as a concept in the 90s, although some companies were using them before this, in the book Built to Last by Jim Collins and Jerry Porras, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes page as well. And from this point, it became much more common for organizations to adopt a set of values to help shape their work. And if you haven't checked it out yet, I'd recommend checking out episode 206 of this podcast, Lead Better by Understanding Your Core Values. I unpack it a bit from an individual perspective there. So let's turn our attention to why values can be useful for a company. So they can form a useful part of organizational culture for a few reasons. Firstly, they can act as a decision-making tool. We can ask questions like, is this strategy, action, product, or acquisition aligned with our values? If not, should we do something else? They can also help us shape behaviors. Values can help people understand what workplace behavior is acceptable and appreciated and what isn't. Values can also attract the right crowd. They can be used to attract employees who share the same ideals, and they can also attract our ideal customers if they resonate with what the business stands for. As an example, the large technology manufacturer Dell uses the values customers, meaning customer focus, winning together, innovation, results, and integrity. The athletic apparel company Under Armour uses love athletes, celebrate the wins, stand for equality, act sustainably, and fight on together. As you can see, some of these are statements of intent rather than just single value words. Regardless, these are used to communicate to employees and customers what the company stands for. I like the use of company values as a way of attempting to help a large number of employees head in the same direction. After all, it's pretty hard getting hundreds or thousands of people working towards the same goal, so company values can help. So what are some of the problems with company values then? Well, in my view, there are a few challenges when it comes to these sorts of organizational values. Firstly, personal values are likely to be very different than company values. In other words, it's unlikely that my personal values will match those of any company that I work for exactly. There'll hopefully be some overlap, but it won't be perfect. And secondly, I notice a degree of cynicism when it comes to company values in the workplace. People stop really caring about them. And there's a few common reasons that I believe are behind this cynicism towards corporate values. Firstly, values become useless when people don't know what they are. Many leaders never talk about them or refer to them, which often renders them as nothing more than a poster on the wall that nobody looks at. And second, many organizations don't use their values for anything. What's the point of having a set of company values if they never really have an impact on the way your team or business operates? And lastly, I think the biggest reason for cynicism comes down to situations when they see leaders or employees acting contrary to the company values without being held to account. For example, the company with the value of integrity, where the senior executive are engaged in intense politics and backstabbing, or the organisation with the value of environment that uses a heap of hard-to-recycle packaging when it sends its products. When people see examples of the values being ignored, they'll start to ignore them too. And I'll also note here, I think some people still have the impression that talking about values is a bit of an airy-fairy hippie subject, but I still find them a very useful, I'll call them like a compass point to refer to make decisions and to actually use them to help you guide your choices in life and in the workplace as well. So I think that attitude is shifting a little bit, the hippiness factor, but I still think that some people shy away from talking about values because it's very personal as well, and I think some people are sensitive to that. But I'd encourage you to explore those, and those PDF downloads that I referenced in the show notes page earlier are good places to start. So, okay, now let's turn to the practical application of how to make company values matter more. Now, it's common to see people roll their eyes when they hear about company values, and we don't want that happening in our teams or organizations. Now, I believe they can add value when used effectively, so let's look at some ideas to try to use them more and better. So the first thing we can do is to simply start talking about them more. So talk about them in team meetings and one-on-one meetings, look for examples of where you saw the values in action, and get team members to talk about their own examples. You are a role model, whether you like it or not, so when you talk about them, you're setting the tone, but that might not be enough. Let's look at some other ideas too, but at least you are raising awareness of the values by talking about them, and that's really the first step. Now, the second thing you can do is to try to make your company values more prominent. We've all seen the poster on the wall in the lunchroom, which everyone ignores. So what about including values in your own presentations, team documents, or having them posted up in your own workspace rather than just the communal areas? Or adding a custom background to your Teams or Zoom chats, which incorporates the values. Now, you don't need HR to do this for you necessarily. You could be proactive and bring more of your company values into your particular work area. Another thing you can try to do is to use company values when you're hiring people. People generally like working in organizations where they feel like they belong, and if an individual's personal values closely align with the company's, this can be one way to try to foster this belonging. Now, when hiring, talk about the values with the candidate. Before the interview, let them know you'll ask them questions about how their values align with the organization's. Then you can tell them what you do with the company values in your team to help shape behaviours and build a sense of camaraderie and belonging. The point here is that we don't want the values to be just something we use in interview questions. We want their impact to be long-lasting and part of the workplace culture. Next, we might try doing a values mapping exercise. An individual's values will never match the company's perfectly, and that's fine and natural. But sometimes I find it useful to encourage a little analysis of how closely the values do align. To do this exercise, I suggest using some of the free personal values lists, which are in the show notes page, or a tool like the Live Your Values deck, and I will put that in the show notes page as well, thoughtleader.com/241. Now, the Live Your Values deck is simply a deck of cards which are nicely illustrated, which have the values listed on them, and you can do like a card sorting exercise. I use this one. I'm not affiliated with this company that makes this in any way, but I really like them. So I'll put a link to those in the show notes page in case you want to check them out. So you can start by having team members individually identify their top 5 values from the lists. Encourage them to look for examples of where those values have shown up in their past experiences to shape who they are today. Then have everyone map their own values against the company values. Where do they match or reinforce each other? And what are the examples of where they differ? And where they differ, what is the potential impact of this? How might the person still be able to act in alignment with their personal values more often, even though there is a difference? And are there situations where this difference can be a strength for the team? Now, the next thing you might try is to use company values in decision-making and performance conversations. Values are ignored when they aren't used, so let's use them. When you are making a team decision, see if you can use the company values as a helpful tool. We could go this way or that way. Which way aligns more closely with the company values? If we went the other way, what could be the potential impact? They might not give you the perfect answer, but they can be an additional source of assistance in the decision-making process. It can also be helpful to use company values in performance or behaviour conversations with your team members. If you're seeing bad behaviour, look for examples of how that behaviour goes against the values. If you're seeing good behaviour, see if there are positive links to the company values in there. Have alignment to the values as a key criteria in performance discussions. Ask people to find examples of where they have aligned with the values, and over time people will hopefully start to learn that the values aren't just lip service, they're used for something. You might even try creating your own set of values, purpose, and related behaviours. So if you find that your company values are a little high level or not able to be referenced meaningfully in your team, consider creating your own tools to use instead. Now, this might be your team's own set of values that are more specific to the members within it, or you may create a team purpose, which helps to link the work of your team with the organisation as a whole. And I'll link to an article about how to create a team purpose in the show notes page as well. You can also tie this to a set of team behaviours that you want to see, and these can be derived from the company values, but they may actually be more specific and practical for you to apply in your team. Now, these behaviours become the way your team operates, and you can then use them as a reference point for examples of good and bad behaviours in your team. It might sound like a bad idea to create your own set of purposes or values for your own team, but I like to actually do that to customise and make it a bit more suited to the team rather than pretending that a generic set of company values can apply to everyone equally. Sometimes tailoring it slightly to your team can be beneficial and make people want to use them more. So I believe company values can be a useful asset if we choose to use them, but over time I've noticed that people have become more and more cynical about their use within a company. And that's because leaders pay lip service to them or never refer to them at all, possibly because they've seen examples of where senior people in the organisation are not following the values and therefore they think, well, why would I bother? So if you believe that values can make a difference in your team, start using them more and they'll actually become more useful. You never know, you might even cultivate a team environment where people feel like they belong. So I'm interested in your thoughts on the topic of company values. I'm sure your company has them. What do you think about them? Do you use them, and how do you use them in meaningful ways for your team? Let me and all the other Thoughtful Leaders know in the comments on the show notes page, thoughtfulleader.com/241. And if you like this episode or the podcast in general, I would be thrilled if you could leave a positive review on your podcast app of choice. Helps me get the word out about the podcast and grow the audience of Thoughtful Leaders even further. So thank you in advance. Okay. Thanks for listening to this episode. Keep up the thoughtful leadership, start using those company values, and I'll be back next week.